My son's wife said I don't contribute enough to stay with them, so I canceled the mortgage payment. The kettle clicks off, and the steam sighs into silence. I stare into my chipped mug, the one with the faded red cardinal on the side. My hands are wrapped around it, more for comfort than warmth. It's early, but not so early that the sun isn't trying. Pale light stretches through the blinds and lands across the oak table, like it's unsure of its welcome. I've lived with my son and his wife for 1.5 years, 18 months give or take, since my knees gave out for good, and the house I once called home became too many stairs and not enough love. At 69, I still remember how it felt to walk barefoot through my garden, picking tomatoes and deadheading roses before the heat set in. Back then, I was Mama. Not her, not the one staying in the guest room, not someone to be tiptoed around like a sleeping cat. But that morning, sitting in their kitchen, while the scent of toast lingered and the floorboards creaked with passive tension, something shifted. "I just think," she said, not looking at me spreading almond butter with surgical precision, "that it's not fair if some people live here and don't contribute." Some people. I looked up surprised. Was this about the groceries? The utility bills I'd offered, hadn't I? More than once. "I don't understand," I said slowly, but she didn't stop. "You've been here for a while, and I know you help with the dishes, and you fold laundry, and you water the plants. But this is our home. We're still young. We're building something. You're not retired, and yet—" She shrugged, a soft smile, laced with venom. "It's a little unfair, don't you think?" I watched her set down the knife and leave it there, just beside the sink, where I'd soon wash it. I wanted to speak to defend myself, but I didn't know how to argue with invisibility. She didn't yell. She didn't insult me. But somehow it was worse. She devalued me in whispers. I had been so careful not to be a burden. So careful. I paid for the groceries more than half the time. I stayed in the guest room, quiet. I didn't complain when her friends came over and took up all the parking space. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week and pretended not to notice when they ordered takeout anyway. But still, I was the one not contributing. I finished my tea in silence, left the mug in the sink. My son was already gone for work. Or maybe he was still upstairs hiding. Either way, I didn't want to see him. Because if he'd heard what she said and said nothing, then he'd already chosen. And if he hadn't heard it, then she was smart enough to know when to say it. Both of those options broke something inside me. That day, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded laundry the way she said I do. I folded it carefully, as if folding fabric could hold back the ache. And I sat with that pain quietly, like it was a guest in my own chest. Not long ago, my son used to call me every Sunday. He used to ask for my lasagna recipe and tell me about a weird noise in his car, like I was the only one who could solve it. Now I was just the furniture. And maybe the furniture was too loud. Maybe the furniture had outstayed its welcome. But what no one knew, what I'd kept tucked away in the back of my filing drawer, along with birth certificates and expired passports, was that the deed to this house had a few fine print surprises. They called me when they wanted to buy it. They needed someone with steady credit, someone who could put up collateral, someone like Mom. And Mom me signed the papers, put down some savings, secured the loan. So when the words "don't contribute" echoed in my ears, I wondered if they even remembered. Or had they convinced themselves they built this house with their own hands and dreams? I didn't say anything to them that night, but I pulled out the papers. I found the bank number. I stared at the signature. It was mine. I'd given them the roof over their heads. And maybe it was time they remembered that. The next morning, I stood in the hallway holding a damp dish towel, listening to the hum of their laughter, drifting up from the living room. It was one of those fake laugh mornings. You can always tell the difference. They were planning something light and fun, probably brunch or a walk with their couple friends, and I stood outside of it. Again, my son said, "We should try that new spot on Lincoln," and his wife replied, "Let's just go. She'll be fine here." She, me. I wasn't angry, not yet, just emptied out. When I moved in, we had agreed it would be temporary, just until I got my knee replacement recovered and figured out whether to downsize or move closer to my sister in Asheville. But that plan kept stretching. I offered to help with bills, and they waved me off, said they were happy to have me, said I made the house warmer. Now apparently I was a drain, a guest who'd forgotten to leave. I went back to my room, the one they always referred to as the guest room, never Mom's room, and opened the drawer where I kept the documents. There, in a manila folder labeled Mortgage Oak Ridge Lane, were the original papers. I read through them carefully, like I was reading a love letter I no longer believed in. They needed me back then. Their credit was shaky. They didn't have the down payment. They were scared of losing the house they'd fallen in love with. So I said yes. I co-signed. I offered $32,000 in savings, my retirement buffer. I told myself it was a gift. I told myself I was doing it for my son's future. But now standing there with paper proof in my hands, I realized it had never felt like a gift to them. Just a tool, a ladder they used to climb and then discarded. I stared at the number listed at the top of the letterhead. Customer service, mortgage management. I picked up the phone. My hands didn't even shake. "Good morning," I said, voice calm. "I'd like to speak to someone about the mortgage at 442 Oak Ridge Lane. I'm listed on the account." The woman on the other end confirmed my name. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "You're a co-signer and primary payment contributor. How can I help?" And that's when it hit me, primary payment contributor. I wasn't just a signature. I had been the one making payments. Quietly, automatically, every month from my linked account. They didn't even know. "I'd like to pause future payments," I said. "Effective immediately. I need to reassess my involvement." There was a silence on the line, and then a polite, "Of course, ma'am. We'll send confirmation via email and postal service. Is there anything else?" I said no, thanked her, hung up, and then I sat down on the edge of the bed and exhaled something I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. I had been treated like a charity case in a house I helped buy, but that was going to change. That night, there was a strange energy in the air. I think they sensed something. My son asked how I was feeling. My daughter-in-law offered to make tea. "Sleep well," she said as I walked past her. And for the first time in a year and a half, I did. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, wrapped in the knowledge that I was no longer helpless. The next day I got up early. I made a list. It started with, call bank, done. Look into short-term rentals. Research senior communities near Asheville. Email Sarah, my sister, about her spare guest house. I didn't know when I'd leave, but I knew now that I would. I knew I wouldn't stay where I wasn't wanted. I knew my worth wasn't defined by how many dishes I washed or how quietly I disappeared during their dinner parties. My worth was mine, and I had signed it at the bottom of their mortgage. They just hadn't bothered to read it. My son came home late that evening. Shoulders hunched, tie loosened, the usual stress of work clinging to him like an old coat. I was sitting on the porch, a blanket draped across my knees, pretending to be interested in the birds nesting in the maple out front. He hesitated at the doorway when he saw me. Then he smiled, small, guilty, performative. "Hey, Mom," he said, like he used to when he was 10 and had done something wrong. Long day, I asked, my voice even. "Yeah, you know how it is." I nodded even though I didn't. Not anymore. He didn't say anything about the tension that had been bubbling just under the surface. Didn't mention what his wife said. Didn't ask if I was okay. But later that night, I heard them arguing in the kitchen. Not yelling exactly. Hushed, sharp-edged whispers. Then footsteps. A knock at my door. It was her, my son's wife. She wore one of those tight, polite smiles that made my skin feel too tight. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said. "I just think we should all be more clear about expectations. This is our home, and we're trying to build a future." I stared at her. For once, really stared. She looked small when you stripped away the gloss. Entitled, yes, but also scared. "You're right," I said. "It is your home." Her face brightened too soon. "And you're right to build your future." She nodded quickly, sensing a win. I leaned back against the pillows. "That's why I canceled the mortgage payment." Her lips parted, confusion clouding her. "What?" "I've been paying the mortgage," I said, calmly. "Every month. Automatically. Since the beginning." The color drained from her face like ink in water. "But you asked me to contribute more, so I stopped contributing entirely." She stood there, jaw clenching, trying to piece together what this meant. "I'll give you the number I added. You'll want to set up your own payment method. The next installment's due in 8 days." Her mouth opened, closed. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. I did. She left without another word. I heard more arguing that night. Loud enough to wake the dog if there had been one. But I slept like a woman who'd finally remembered her name. The next day, the bank called her. Then him. They were both home early, faces tight. My son tried to play peacemaker. Told me it was just a miscommunication. That I should have talked to him. I asked him gently if he remembered why the house was approved in the first place. He didn't answer. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I won't live where I'm not welcome." He looked like he might cry. It didn't move me, because I'd cried already. In silence, in guest rooms, in kitchens where I wasn't spoken to. This wasn't punishment. It was peace. The silence in the house changed after that. Not tense, just awkward. They tiptoed, smiled too wide. She offered me breakfast. The next morning, scrambled eggs and fake cheer. I ate in silence, the eggs dry the air thicker than ever. 2 days later, I got an email confirming my new rental in Asheville. Small place, 2 bedrooms, porch swing, washer and dryer included. Perfect. I booked a moving van. Not much to take. I didn't tell them until the day before. My son stood in the driveway, staring at the truck, looking 10 years older. "Mom," he said, voice cracked, "you don't have to go." I placed a folded receipt into his hand. $32,000, I said. That was my contribution. Everything after that was just me, forgetting how to leave. He looked stunned. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" I smiled. I was waiting to be asked. He didn't respond. I hugged him. Not because he earned it, but because I needed to. And then I got in the passenger seat of the rental van and let the driver take me someplace I could exhale. The road away from their house wasn't long, but it felt like a slow unwinding of everything I had once twisted into place for them. Each turn, each mile stripped another layer of obligation I had worn like armor. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Instead, I watched the trees blur past and felt something between sorrow and relief settle into my bones. I was heading to a town I hadn't lived in for decades. Asheville. My sister Sarah lived just outside the city limits in a cozy cottage that used to belong to our aunt. She had renovated the guest house out back after her divorce, mostly as a hobby. I called her the night I booked it. "You're not serious," she said. "You're really coming." "I am." "Well," she said after a pause, "the place could use life again, and I'd rather you drink tea on the porch with me than wash someone else's dishes in silence." That sentence stuck with me. For years, I had confused helpfulness with love. I thought, by giving my time, my space, my money, I was earning a place in my son's new life. But you can't buy belonging. You can only offer it, and once it's refused, well, the guest house was small, but beautiful. Wooden beams, wide windows, a porch swing that creaked when the wind leaned in. Sarah had stocked the fridge, made up the bed with thick quilts, and left a vase of lilacs on the kitchen table. It smelled like peace. That first evening, I stood barefoot on the porch, mug of chamomile in hand, listening to the cicadas hum their song. No one asked me to move my things. No one avoided eye contact or said "some people" with a sweet, sour smile. I was wanted, not tolerated. A few days passed. I unpacked slowly, setting up only what I needed. One morning, a card arrived in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. My son's. Inside, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you'd done. I didn't speak up when I should have. I let her speak for both of us, and that's on me. I don't know if you'll forgive me, but I want you to know I see it now. I see you. I hope we can talk soon. Love, Ben." I read it twice. I didn't cry, but I pressed the card to my chest and let the silence of forgiveness, not given, not denied, rest between us. I didn't write back, not yet. Instead, I brewed another cup of tea, sat with Sarah as the sun went down. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn the seat I was sitting in. Some days, I wonder if they miss me, or just the convenience of me. I used to fold their laundry like I had when my son was 10 shirts stacked by color socks, matched with care. I cooked meals that took hours, meals with stories in the seasoning. But none of that made me visible. Here in Asheville, I started to become a person again. There's a woman next door named Helen, 82, sharp as glass. She grows tomatoes that taste like sunshine and curses like a sailor when the deer eat them. She invited me over the second day I was here. "Don't bring anything," she barked, "unless it's good gossip." I laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. The world became warmer after that. I joined a knitting group. I took a gentle yoga class at the community center. I baked my grandmother's molasses cookies and handed them out like business cards. Nobody asked me to prove myself. Nobody asked for receipts. And still, they gave me a place. One afternoon, Sarah sat across from me on the porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the wind roll through the dogwoods. "You're glowing," she said. "Don't be dramatic," I smiled. "No," she insisted. "There's color in your cheeks again. Like your bones remembered they belonged to you." I didn't respond right away, because she was right. I had spent so long being careful not to take up space, careful not to offend, careful not to be a problem. And in that carefulness, I disappeared. But here I stretched again. I exhaled. A week later, my granddaughter called. Her voice was hesitant at first. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you mad at Daddy?" I closed my eyes. That ache. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm just somewhere. I feel better now." She asked if she could visit. I said yes. She asked if I'd bake those cookies again. I said, of course. We talked about school, about her new backpack, about how her mom didn't like when she used glitter glue. And then she said, "I miss you." I pressed the phone to my ear and let the quiet settle in again. "I miss you too, baby." After the call, I sat for a long time, staring at the horizon, the way the light melted gold over the hills. That's when I pulled out the letter I had started writing weeks ago, to her, to my granddaughter. It wasn't long, just a page. I told her I loved her, that sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind, even when they love each other. That standing up for yourself isn't mean, it's necessary. I tucked the letter into a drawer. I might send it one day, or I might just keep it in case the world gives me the chance to explain with more than words. But either way, I had said it, and sometimes that's enough. Continue. ChatGPT Janoi U. The leaves began to shift, little by little, as summer whispered its goodbyes. In Asheville, autumn arrives, not with a bang, but a hush, a quiet miracle of color sneaking in overnight. It reminded me of how change often happens, quietly, softly, until one day you realize you're no longer where you once were, mentally, emotionally, or even physically. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my lap, a steaming cup of cinnamon tea in hand, and watched a single golden leaf flutter down from the maple. It was the kind of peace I used to think only existed in magazines or the background of someone else's life. Sarah came out with a second mug, passed it to me without speaking. "We're going to decorate for fall next weekend," she said after a moment. "Pumpkins, gourds, the whole cliché." I chuckled. Count me in. It was simple, but I felt the invitation deeply. A few days later, I received a second letter from Ben. Longer, more detailed. He wrote about realizing he hadn't just failed me, he had failed himself, that he let convenience dictate his conscience, that he'd started therapy. He even admitted he didn't know how to fix it, only that he wanted to try. I read it 3 times, and then I folded it carefully, placed it beside the first card in my drawer. No response yet. Sometimes silence is the only answer love understands. But I didn't feel bitter anymore. Bitterness takes root when you hold pain too tightly, and I had begun to let mine go, piece by piece. That weekend, Sarah and I carved pumpkins, like we were 12 again. Hers had perfect symmetry. Mine looked like it had a secret. We laughed until my stomach hurt. That night, wrapped in a thick cardigan, I walked the gravel path behind the guest house and stared up at the sky. The stars were clearer here, closer, like the world was leaning in to listen. I thought about all the women like me, mothers, grandmothers, who gave too much, stayed too quiet, and believed that love required sacrifice, without boundaries. But I've learned that love without respect is just performance, and contribution without appreciation is just exploitation. If you've ever been made to feel like you were too much or not enough in the same breath, I hope you know that your worth isn't up for debate. That night, I wrote one more letter. Not to Ben, not to his wife, to myself. It simply read, "You were never a burden. You were a blessing that others forgot to see." I slept better after that, not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally remembered who I was before they taught me to doubt it. The season shifted in full, and with it, something in me fully settled too. The mornings were colder now, crisp, clean, the kind that made you breathe deeper, just to taste the air. I started waking earlier, not out of necessity, but choice. I'd sit with a shawl over my shoulders, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, and watch the birds flit between the bare branches, like notes on a music sheet. Peace, I'd learned, doesn't mean quiet. It means unbothered. It means choosing yourself, even when you've been trained not to. One Sunday, I was walking through the little farmer's market at the edge of town when I saw a boy with the same eyes as my son, round kind, unsure. He was holding his grandmother's hand, and I felt it again, that ache. Not sharp, but there. A bruise that doesn't fade completely. I missed him. Of course I did. I missed the little boy version of him, the one who used to draw me lopsided hearts and fall asleep on my shoulder. But I didn't miss the woman who came between us. I didn't miss the silence in that house, the way I walked on eggshells in a home I helped create. Still, love is strange. It doesn't dissolve, it just changes shape. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. I opened a new envelope and began a third letter. "Ben, maybe one day we'll sit at a table together again. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but as 2 people who choose to listen. Until then, I'm living. I'm healing. I hope you are too." I didn't sign it Love Mom. Not yet. Just Mom. And I left it open on the table, unsure whether I'd send it. Sometimes writing something is enough to let it go. Later, Sarah and I made soup. Potato leek, the way our mother used to. We laughed about how she always forgot the salt and swore it was intentional. The kitchen smelled like childhood, like comfort, like home. And in that moment, I realized something I wish I had known sooner. You don't always get closure. Sometimes you give it to yourself. You walk away with grace. You love from a distance. You forgive quietly for your own sake, not theirs. And that is enough. That is everything. It was late October when my granddaughter came to visit. Ben had called ahead, asked if it was okay. His voice was tentative, like a man trying to rebuild a bridge he'd set on fire. "I think she needs to see you," he said, "and I think I need to let her." I told him yes, of course, because she was never the one who hurt me. She arrived with a pink backpack and a pumpkin cookie for me, her eyes wide, like the hills around us. She ran into my arms, like no time had passed at all. Children are like that, merciful in ways adults forget how to be. We spent the afternoon baking. She stirred while I measured. She wore my old apron, the one with the flower-stained pockets, and a faded red cardinal stitched near the hem. I told her stories, not the heavy ones, just the ones with warmth. She giggled when I told her about the time her father got stuck in a tree trying to impress a girl. She asked if I still had the lasagna recipe. I told her I'd write it down just for her. That night, she slept in the second bedroom, curled under quilts that smelled of lavender and old memories. I sat by the window, a cup of tea in hand, and looked out into the dark. Ben had brought her and left. He didn't stay, but he had looked me in the eyes. And in that look was something I hadn't seen in years. Remorse. Not pity, not defensiveness. Just a man who knew he'd let something slip through his hands. And maybe in time, we would sit across from each other again. Maybe not. But I had my granddaughter under my roof. And that night, the house felt full. I left the door cracked open, just in case she woke up and needed me, like her father used to. And for a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that what was broken wouldn't always stay that way. Hope that love, if given space and time, might still find a way to return, not in the form you expect, but in one you recognize by feel. The next morning, she handed me a drawing before she left. It was a house, a porch swing, 2 stick figures holding mugs. "Is that us?" I asked. She nodded. "You and me. You look happy." I smiled. "I am." And I meant it. Because joy doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the scribble of a crayon, in the second cup of tea, in the quiet knowledge that you did the brave thing. You walked away, not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. By the time Thanksgiving crept around, the leaves were mostly gone, and frost rimmed the mornings like delicate lace. The small corner of Asheville I now called home had begun to feel less like a retreat and more like a rebirth. I got invitations from neighbors. Helen insisted I stop by for her infamous bourbon pecan pie. Sarah and I planned a small dinner with just the 2 of us, plus a folding chair set at the end of the table just in case. We didn't speak about who the chair was for. It was enough to have it there. The day before Thanksgiving, I received a letter, handwritten, a little shaky. It was from my son. "I know I broke something," it said, "and I'm not asking to be forgiven yet, but I'd like to try and understand. I didn't protect you. I let love get quiet and convenience get loud. I should have remembered what you gave, how you gave, and who you are." At the bottom, just one sentence stuck with me. "I've been looking at the house differently. Without your name on it, it doesn't feel like home." I didn't write back, but I read it twice before tucking it into the drawer with the others. Later that night, Sarah and I sat under the porch heater, sipping cider and peeling apples for pie. She looked at me and said, "You seem taller somehow." "I think I just stopped shrinking," I replied. It was true. When you spend years folding yourself into smaller shapes to fit the spaces others allow you, you forget what it feels like to stand fully in your own frame. Now I stretched. I breathed deep. I laughed louder, and I didn't apologize for for taking up space. That night, I lit a candle and placed it by the window, not as a sign of mourning, but as a symbol. I was still here, still loving, still open. But I wasn't waiting anymore. If they wanted to find me, they could follow the light. The door wasn't locked, but I wasn't going to beg anyone to knock. Thanksgiving morning arrived, with a pink sky and the smell of cinnamon. Sarah played Ella Fitzgerald on the record player. We cooked together like we had as girls, laughing, bumping elbows, arguing over how much nutmeg was too much. And as the pie cooled on the counter, I glanced at the extra chair. It stayed empty, but it didn't feel sad. It felt honest. Some absences are sacred. Some spaces are meant to hold memory, not presence. And I had learned that healing isn't just a return to who you were. It's becoming someone stronger than you ever imagined because of what you walked through, because you chose not to stay where love cost you your dignity, because you left with grace. Winter settled in like a hush across the hills. Morning frost etched the windows in delicate patterns, and the air carried that sharp, clean stillness that only December brings. By now, my routines were second nature. Early walks wrapped in scarves, tea-steeped, strong phone calls with old friends I'd lost touch with, while trying too hard to belong in someone else's house. I had reclaimed my time, and slowly it began to feel like mine. The truth is, starting over at 69 isn't about grand reinventions. It's about remembering who you were before you were forgotten, before you were reduced to a helper, a favor, a placeholder. I'd started painting again. Nothing fancy, just watercolors. Little bowls of fruit, landscapes, birds at the feeder. It didn't matter how they turned out. What mattered was that I had a room to leave the supplies out half finished and waiting not packed away to make room for others. There was joy in the unfinished. Then one cold afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Ben, alone. He looked smaller somehow, or maybe I was just taller now. I didn't invite him in, not right away. We stood on the porch. "I wanted to see you," he said. "Not to fix things, just to be here." I nodded, said nothing. "I didn't know how much I hurt you," he went on. "I thought saying nothing was the same as staying neutral. But I see now it was permission. I gave her permission to treat you like a tenant, and you were never that." The wind rustled between us. Leaves scraped the porch floor like old ghosts. "I'm not proud of who I was," he said, "but I'm trying to become someone my daughter can be proud of." That part I believed. I stepped aside and opened the door. He didn't rush in. He stood for a moment, eyes misting. Then slowly he entered. We sat. We didn't talk about everything, just enough. Sometimes the deepest forgiveness lives in the spaces between words. Before he left, he looked around the small guest house, the art supplies on the table, the tea kettle on the stove. "You look happy," he said softly. "I am," I replied. "I built this." He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it felt real. He didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask me to come back. He just said, "Can I visit again sometime?" And I said yes, because setting boundaries doesn't mean building walls. It means planting gardens where doors used to be. Christmas came quieter than it used to. No big tree, no tangled lights, no long grocery lists or frantic wrapping paper. Just a few candles, some pine branches across the mantel, and the scent of nutmeg lingering in the air. Sarah and I kept things simple: roasted vegetables, cranberry cake, and one gift each. Mine was a hand-bound journal. Inside the cover, she'd written, "For the life you still get to write." I held it in my hands longer than necessary, because for a long time, I didn't believe I was allowed to start over. So many of us, especially women, especially mothers, learn to make do, to stay quiet, to age into shadows so others can shine. But here I was, holding blank pages, given without expectation, a gift I didn't know I needed. I wrote that night, not about the hurt, not even about the betrayal, but about the moment I woke up and realized I didn't have to stay where I wasn't seen. I wrote about the power of one suitcase, the dignity in leaving, and the quiet joy of building a home that fits only you and still feels full. On Christmas morning, I got a call from Ben. He didn't mention the holiday right away. He just asked, "What are you doing?" "Watching the wind move the bird feeders," I said. "Drinking coffee." Silence. "Then I miss you." "I know," I replied. "I miss what we were. But I'm not going back to who I was. I wouldn't ask you to. I didn't know what came next. And that was okay, because I wasn't living for next anymore. I was finally living now. When I hung up, I pulled my coat on and stepped out into the morning. Snow had dusted the edges of the fence. A pair of cardinals darted from branch to branch, leaving tiny prints in the snow. I stood still and watched them red against white. Life bold and bright even in the cold. And I realized healing is not a destination. It's this standing where you once wept and realizing you're no longer broken. Not in the same way. Not anymore. The new year arrived without fanfare. No loud countdown, no fireworks shaking the windows. Just the sound of the wind through the trees and the creak of the porch swing as I sat wrapped in my thickest shawl, breathing in the stillness. It felt like the first new year I'd spent truly alone, and yet I didn't feel lonely. Alone and lonely are not the same thing. Alone is quiet, sacred, a clearing. Lonely is when you're surrounded by people and still unseen. And I'd had enough of that to last a lifetime. I made my own little ritual that night. Lit 3 candles, one for the woman I used to be, one for the woman I had become, and one for whoever I'd grow into next. I didn't make any resolutions. Just a promise to never again shrink so someone else could feel bigger. The next week, I mailed a letter to my granddaughter, not the one I wrote in the early days of my leaving. A new one. "Dear heart, I want you to grow up, knowing that love should never make you small. That home isn't a place you tiptoe through. It's where your laughter is loud, your questions are welcome, and your worth is never up for debate. And if one day you forget that come find me, I'll remind you." I sealed the envelope with hands that no longer trembled. A few days later, Ben sent a photo, her smiling, holding the letter, a small heart drawn in purple marker on the back. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to, because healing doesn't always come with perfect apologies. Sometimes it's in a gesture, a letter, a photo, a quiet understanding that says I'm trying. And that's enough for now. Winter softened, not in temperature, but in tone. The edges of things didn't hurt the way they used to. I took longer walks, read more books, hung wind chimes outside the guest house that made the whole place sing when the breeze swept in. And every so often, I'd pass the mirror and barely recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I stood taller, straighter. I no longer looked for permission in my own reflection. I gave it to be here, to take up space, to love and be loved without condition, without performance, without shrinking. Spring came early that year, the kind of spring that skips over the muddy in-between and jumps straight to daffodils, blooming like small suns. The air smelled different, brighter, sweeter, and so did I. Not in perfume or lotion, but in spirit. There's a scent to freedom, to peace, to the absence of waiting for the next unkind word. I had stopped counting the days since I left. It no longer mattered how long it had been. What mattered was everything that had unfolded after. The small miracles. The first time I laughed without guilt. The first time I filled a room with music instead of quiet. The first time I looked at a calendar and didn't dread the family birthdays I once bent backward to be included in. Ben had kept his word. He visited once a month. Never stayed too long. never pushed too hard. Just enough. We'd sit on the porch and talk about nothing mostly. About weather and books, and his daughter's new fascination with frogs. He brought her with him sometimes. She'd run ahead up the gravel path, arms wide, always sure she'd be welcome. And she was. Love doesn't forget children. It doesn't punish them for the choices of their parents. One day, while planting herbs with Sarah, I asked her if she thought I'd done the right thing. Leaving, she asked. Or stopping the mortgage. Both. She wiped her hands on her jeans, looked at me with a steady, knowing gaze. I think you finally treated yourself the way you treated everyone else for years, she said, with generosity, care, and protection. I nodded, because that's what it really came down to. Not revenge, not punishment. Just a mother who remembered she was a person, too. It's funny, when I was living under their roof, I thought I was preserving something, keeping the family intact. But families are not kept. They are nurtured. And if love comes with silence, shame and side eyes over dinner, that's not a family. That's a performance. Here I'd built something else. Not a legacy. Not a monument. Just a life. Mine. The last week of April, Ben brought me a wrapped box. Inside was a framed photo of us when he was 5, me holding his hand, both of us beaming at the zoo. I found it in an old box in the garage, he said. Thought maybe it belonged here. I touched the glass and smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because sometimes even a scar is a sign of healing. And just like that, the air turned warm, again steadily, almost shyly. Morning light lingered longer on the porch, coaxing blooms from buds that had waited all winter. I wasn't waiting anymore. There was no special date circled on the calendar. No apology I needed like oxygen. No moment of perfect closure I held my breath for. Instead, there was this a rhythm. Tea in the morning, birds at the feeder, laughter from the neighbors' grandkids spilling across the yard like music. Ben's visits had settled into something softer, no longer tension-laced or heavy with unspoken words. He helped me plant tomatoes last week, kneeling in the dirt beside me, like he used to when he was a boy, helping me in our backyard. He doesn't say much about the past anymore, and I don't ask. Not because I've forgotten, but because some parts of life are better honored in silence than dissected in conversation. What matters more is that he shows up, and more importantly, that I no longer expect him to. Freedom is detaching your peace from someone else's consistency. One morning, I got a voicemail from his wife. Her voice was strained, measured like someone trying hard not to sound small. I just wanted to say thank you, she said, for what you did for us. I know I didn't act grateful. I was young. I was selfish. I'm sorry. That was it. I didn't call back. There are some acknowledgments that don't require dialogue. Some moments where silence is not absence, it's dignity. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun lowered across the fields. The sky was streaked with lavender and rose gold, as if even the heavens were closing the day with grace. I thought back to that first morning, the one where I stood in the kitchen, holding a chipped mug, hearing the words that changed everything. You don't contribute enough. Back then, it gutted me. Now I can't hear it without shaking my head, because I contributed everything. My savings, my signature, my silence, but most of all myself. And when it wasn't appreciated, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I left, not out of spite, but because staying would have meant betraying the one person I had never allowed myself to put first. Me. Now when I look in the mirror, I don't see a woman waiting to be accepted. I see someone who already knows her worth and finally lives like it. The final days of spring were the kind that made you believe in second chances. Warm breezes through open windows, sunlight that lingered on your skin like a secret. I was sitting outside, one morning notebook in my lap, jotting down small observations, what the wind sounded like through the pine trees, the way the birds argued over the feeder, how the earth smelled just after sunrise. It wasn't journaling, not really. Just proof, I suppose, that I was here, that I had come through something hard and survived it with my softness intact. It was then that my granddaughter came bounding down the gravel path. Again, ponytail crooked shoes, untied hands full of daisies. She didn't knock. She never does. She just ran to me like joy, with feet throwing her arms around my waist. "I made you something," she said breathlessly. It was a little book-folded construction paper tape holding the spine together. On the front, it said in big purple letters, "Things I love about Grandma." Inside, "You smell like cookies. You make the best toast. You let me talk a lot. You don't yell when I drop stuff. You always come back." That last one stayed with me. You always come back. Because in a way I had, not to that house, not to that life, but to myself, to the mother I used to be, to the woman I'd put on pause. Later, while she napped, curled up on my couch, I stood at the window and let the breeze press against the glass like a whisper. I thought about legacy, about the kind that isn't money or property, but memory, the kind you leave in a child's heart. I didn't need to be written into wills or recognized at family dinners. I just needed to be remembered like this, present, strong, gentle. Not a martyr, a mother who chose herself, and in doing so, showed her family a better way. When Ben came to pick her up, he lingered in the doorway. "She loves it here," he said. "So do I replied. He hesitated. "Do you ever think about coming back?" I smiled kindly. "Not even for a minute." He nodded slowly. "I get that now." There was no anger left, no bitterness, just clarity. And in that clarity, I had built a home, one made of quiet and laughter and lilac-scented air, one where love didn't demand my silence, one where I could take up space, and no one ever made me earn it. The day I turned 70, there was no grand party, no cake with candles, no speech, just a porch full of daffodils, a pot of tea that didn't go cold, and my sister humming in the kitchen, while something sweet baked slowly in the oven. Ben called. So did my granddaughter, her voice bright as ever. "You don't sound 70, she said. "I don't feel 70, I smiled. "I feel like I just got started." Because in so many ways, I had. All those years I spent bending, smoothing the edges, biting my tongue, holding my breath. Years spent earning my right to exist in spaces I already built. And now I was finally living them for me. I had planted tomatoes in the spring. They were ripening now, fat red, perfect. I plucked the first one and held it in my hand like a small victory. Because that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not a grand gesture, not a sudden breakthrough, just a woman older and wiser, holding the fruit of her own labor. I sat with Sarah that evening, our feet up the sun, dipping behind the trees. "You know," she said, "you could have stayed, taken the easy way, swallowed it all." I nodded. "I almost did, but you didn't." "No," I said, "because I realized something. If I stayed, I was teaching my granddaughter that love means silence, that safety is about walking on eggshells, that family means being tolerated instead of cherished. And now I'm teaching her something else, that we get to start over, that we're allowed to say, this isn't love, that we can walk away without burning down the house just by taking the key and choosing never to turn it again." I stood up stretching. The wind carried the sound of wind chimes from next door. I looked around at the world I had built for myself. A small place, quiet, sacred, and I whispered softly, "Not for anyone else to hear. I'm proud of you." Because I was. And I am. Because I left. Because I lived. Because I remembered who I was before they taught me to forget. The sun sets a little slower now, or maybe I've just started noticing. There's a gentleness to the way the light leans in across the porch, softening everything it touches. I've stopped checking the mailbox for letters that might not come. I've stopped rehearsing what I'd say if they ever asked me to come back. Because this life isn't a pause or a placeholder. It's mine, fully, finally. There's a ritual I've fallen into now. Each night, I write one sentence in the journal Sarah gave me. Just one. Sometimes it's mundane. The rosemary bloomed today. Other times, it's something heavier. I remembered what it felt like to be spoken over, and I didn't miss it. But last night I wrote, I gave them a house, and they gave me clarity. It wasn't bitterness. It was just the truth. Because walking away wasn't the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of self-respect. There are days I miss being needed. Days I miss hearing my name, called from another room. But I no longer miss who I was in their house, how I was made to feel like a footnote in a life I helped write. Now I am the headline, the main character, and I've learned to carry myself like it. If I'm being honest, I still keep the mortgage paperwork, not out of spite, but as a reminder that I contributed, that I built the very home I was made to feel unwelcome in. And I walked away, not in anger, but in wisdom. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I refused to hurt myself anymore. And slowly, gently, I forgave. Not because they asked, but because I wanted peace more than I wanted justice. And that peace, it found me. In birdsong, in tomato vines, in a purple crayon drawing of two stick figures on a porch swing. In my own heartbeat, steady now, and in the quiet understanding that I did not leave empty-handed. I left with everything I needed. The air is softer now. The world feels slower, but not heavy. Just unrushed, like it finally understands I'm no longer chasing time. And after everything, after the humiliation, the silence, the moment I was told I didn't contribute enough, I've come to a place where my soul can breathe without flinching. This morning, I walked out barefoot into the garden behind the guest house. The dew soaked into my skin. The soil was warm from the sun. The rosemary bush was blooming again, and a pair of mourning doves were nesting in the same tree as last year. Some things return quietly, others stay gone, and I no longer chase either. Ben still visits, less often now, and I think that's okay. We've said what we needed to say. Not everything, but enough. His wife hasn't come. She probably never will. I've made peace with that too. I don't need her to see me. I've already done the seeing. I see myself clearly now. Not a burden, not a helper, not someone to be squeezed into someone else's life, but a woman who gave and finally gave to herself. A woman who once signed a mortgage and got nothing but cold dinners and invisible birthdays in return, and then stopped signing, stopped shrinking, started over. I think about that sometimes, how powerful it is to say no more without raising your voice, how gentle rebellion looks like a packed suitcase and a silent car ride toward a better life. The world didn't applaud when I left. No one threw confetti or called me brave. But I'll tell you this, the wind sounded different that day. Like it knew, like it was proud. And now, as I sit on this porch with my tea, I close my eyes and let the breeze move through my hair. I think of all the women like me, folded, forgotten, dismissed, with phrases like, don't contribute, or just staying temporarily. If you're one of them, hear me. You don't need permission to reclaim your name. You don't need an audience to begin again. You just need one decision and a little silence to listen to yourself again. Because the woman I used to be, she's not gone. She's right here, and she's free. The garden is quiet this evening. A hush hangs in the air, broken only by the slow creak of the porch swing beneath me and the hum of crickets warming up for nightfall. This is what peace sounds like. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of judgment. The absence of being evaluated for how many dishes I washed, how many favors I gave, how many ways I kept silent to maintain someone else's comfort. I think about the version of me that stayed too long in someone else's house, the one who bent and bowed and busied herself with chores so she wouldn't be a bother. And I want to hold her hand. I want to tell her gently, you didn't have to do that. You were already enough. This little home, with its crooked fence and wild rosemary, isn't perfect, but it's mine, and not because my name is on a deed or a lease, because I belong here, without conditions, without compromise. The other day, my granddaughter sent me a picture she drew in school. A house with a garden, a woman with white hair, a little girl beside her. Underneath, in her 6-year-old scrawl, she wrote, "Grandma's house is my favorite place, because nobody whispers." And that told me everything I needed to know, because it means I did it. I broke the pattern. I left the table that fed me shame and built a new one, with space for laughter, gentleness, and second chances. One day, I might send her all the letters I wrote. Maybe when she's older, maybe when she's ready. But for now, I'll keep adding to them, one by one, quiet reminders that love doesn't require silence, that giving doesn't mean erasing, that leaving isn't losing, it's choosing yourself, and that there's nothing selfish about wanting to be seen. Spring rolled gently into early summer. The light stayed longer, stretching past dinner, curling soft, golden fingers around the trees, brushing warmth into the corners of the day. The world felt wide again, my world. There are days now when I forget how small I used to feel, how quiet, how careful. It's not that the memory disappears. It just becomes background noise, like the faint hum of an old refrigerator. Still there, but no longer ruling the room. Last week, I found the mortgage papers again while cleaning. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I felt distance, a kind of emotional muscle memory, like reading someone else's story written in your handwriting. I didn't put them back in the drawer. I folded them once carefully and burned them in a small tin basin behind the house. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. And as the smoke lifted, I realized I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. Not proof, not pain, not permission, just peace. The kind you grow slowly when no one's watching. That night, as the sky turned violet and stars began to pierce through, I wrote my final letter. To myself, you did it. You walked away with grace. You didn't scream or beg or shrink. You simply stopped giving to those who only took. And now, look at you whole, warm, wildly free. You didn't lose your family. You found yourself, and that's the beginning of everything. I folded the letter and placed it inside the front cover of my journal, not to forget, but to remember what I reclaimed. And as the moon rose above the trees and a soft wind rolled across the porch, I whispered what I wish someone had told me long ago. You are allowed to leave the table when love is no longer being served. Then I stood bare feet on wooden planks and stepped inside the life I chose. And now, here we are at the quiet edge of the story. No grand finale, no curtain drop. Just a woman older now, sitting on a porch that smells faintly of lavender and rain, breathing in a life she built from the scraps no one thought she'd keep. I've watched the seasons turn twice since I left that house. The house where my name was on the papers, but not on their hearts. And I've watched myself turn too, into someone softer, not in weakness, but in wisdom. Into someone stronger, not because I fought louder, but because I finally stopped fighting for crumbs. Sometimes I still hear that voice, her voice floating up from memory. You don't contribute enough. But now I don't argue with it. I don't try to justify or explain. I just smile, because now I know I contributed my peace. I contributed my silence, my patience, my loyalty, my care. And when none of it was honored, I contributed my absence, the most powerful contribution I could ever offer. This morning I mailed one last letter. Not to my son, not even to my granddaughter, to a woman like me. Maybe someone reading this, maybe you. You're not too much. You're not a burden. You're not selfish for wanting to be treated with tenderness. If your presence is invisible, let your absence speak. If the door doesn't open for you, build a home with your own key. You deserve peace. You deserve softness. And you don't have to stay where love feels like labor. I signed it from someone who finally remembered who she was. And now, as the last light dips behind the trees, I close my eyes and breathe deep. Not because I'm waiting anymore, but because I'm home. Truly holy, unapologetically home. Life has a way of teaching us in quiet whispers long after the noise has faded. If you're still reading this, maybe a part of you understands. Maybe you've sat at a table where you were spoken over. Maybe you've poured from a cup that no one refilled. Maybe you've carried the weight of being no trouble, while your heart ached for someone to see you. You're not alone. And what I want to leave you with more than anything is this: it's never too late to start over. Not at 40, not at 70, not even tomorrow. Not because you want to prove something, but because you deserve to feel whole. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do isn't to shout. It's to stand quietly, steadily, with your bags packed and your dignity intact. To choose yourself when no one else does. To water your own soil. To turn the key on a door no one thought you'd walk through and close it behind you, not in anger, but in grace. If you're sitting in silence right now, feeling the tug of something more, go gently toward it. Not for them, for you. You are not just a helper, or a mother, or a guest in someone else's world. You are you, and that is more than enough.